Welcome. My name is Soon Yu, and I have the honor and privilege of being your host today. And so I have a couple of jobs. My first job is, one, make sure we stay on time because there's a lot of great stuff to get to. Number two, I want to make sure that we connect all these great speakers to the theme we have for this conference. And lastly, want to make sure, with your help, that we all stay engaged, energized, and that we're having fun, okay? So a little bit about myself. I love how they put up my title there. I recently left my job about 2 months ago, so I am a former head of innovation at VF Corp. Many of you have heard of VF Corp, many of you have not, but I'm sure you've heard of the brands. It's a large apparel manufacturer of 30 different brands under management. Some of them include the North Face, Vans, Timberland, Wrangler, so I'm sure you've heard of some of those brands. Currently, I've actually left and I am writing a book. Here's my plug. It's called Iconic Advantage, and when it comes out next year, you're all going to buy it, right? Okay, good, great. It's really focused on helping brands unleash the iconic potential that's inside of their current franchises. So very excited to be writing about that. Anyway, so today, this is what we're going to be talking about. It's this idea: command the boardroom. And I actually think this is a highly relevant topic. You see, in my background, I have run innovation, I've done marketing, and a very well-kept secret is I actually ran an insights team for 2 years at Chiquita. So I have a bit of empathy, but I also have a high degree of appreciation of the contribution and the value of the folks in this room in terms of really driving the agenda and really becoming the eyes and ears for the organization. Because when I think about this, just close your eyes for a second. Imagine your typical corporate boardroom and think of the makeup. Does it really represent the consumers that most businesses are trying to connect with? Okay, gross generalization, and maybe I'm doing some statistics and mediums here, but generally most boardrooms are executive leadership rooms. What do they look like? They're a little bit older, they're a little bit more male, and a little bit more white. Well, within the US or beyond the US, obviously beyond these borders, that's not the predominant representation, right? I think the average age is about half of what's in a boardroom. I think, obviously, in terms of male, I think half the population is not male. And white, definitely, last I checked, I think that demographic is now maybe less than 1/5 of the population and is not the predominant demographic. So, the goal is, how can you bring the eyes, ears, and hearts of your consumers into the boardroom? You can't expect the board folks to do it. They're not going to be the ones at the front lines actually working with our consumers, understanding what their real deep needs and insights and values are. That's the job that we have today. And that's why it's more critical than ever to make sure that we have a broad representation in the boardroom, in the executive meetings, in the strategic discussions. And I feel very passionate about that because being in innovation, I was very much blind without my insights partner. And my insights partner was my best partner. It was a partner that not only helped me see when I was wrong, and oftentimes I was wrong, because I just wasn't the consumer, but on the opposite end, it also oftentimes gave me the inspiration. You know, sitting, watching ethnography, seeing some compensatory behavior, those are the times I felt the most excited about the potential of whatever that idea was because of the consumers. And how do we take that same magic and bring it into the boardroom? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today in this conference. We're going to have a lot of great speakers. We're going to look at some frameworks that are really going to help you bring the eyes and ears and hearts of consumers into the boardroom. And it's needed. Not only is it needed because there's sort of a blindness there and there's not a representation of the demographic, so to speak, but it's probably more urgent than ever. The world's changing so fast. Our consumers are changing so fast. And so it used to be you could wait a few months or 6 months. Now you can't wait that long to share new information, to share new insights. Business models are changing too, and how consumers are reacting to those business models, sometimes we don't know. But we need to have that foresight and that vision about what that future is from this team into those meetings, and more importantly, not only helping to answer the questions, but truthfully, I think your job is going to be going forward, helping to frame what are the right questions we should be asking. And that's a different role, but it is a critical one that I think this team here has to do. Okay, so when I think about commanding the boardroom, I also think about another issue that's related to why a lot of ideas don't make it through the boardroom. In fact, I think often about this idea. Why do most big ideas, ones that have incredible desirability, that have a strong leverageable insight that speaks to a benefit that consumers totally believe against the reasons to believe, they either do two things, don't get commercialized, or through the process somehow get whittled down so that a big idea becomes a small idea? There's a reason the organizers asked me to actually host this. It's one, because I'm actually very passionate about the increased and prominent role that the insights and research team needs to play in the boardroom. But also it's because on this question, I am an expert at that last word, fail. I actually commit to you that in this room, I'm probably the biggest failure of the bunch, okay? And let me explain, all right? I know data is kind of important to this team, so let me just share a little bit here. Here's my scorecard of failure, okay? So I've actually had 4 career starts. I need to up that. That's 5. This is my most new career start. That's leaving my job, being unemployed, trying to write a book. And let me explain the idea about career starts. It's not a recruiter called me up and said, hey, you want to go to another industry. Each one of those were preceded by 6 months of unemployment. Let's see. I've had 5 businesses dissolved. One of the things I didn't mention is I was involved in about 7 different startups in my life. And let's just say a lot of them didn't make it. And here's the problem. When you had a lot of career restarts and a lot of businesses dissolved, this next one really gives me some pain, but I've had to do 6 rounds of layoffs. And that means I've had to sit across the table from people I really care about and who I knew their family members and basically explain that at the end of next week, I can't make payroll. That was really tough discussions. As a result of all this activity, I had over 20 failed product launches, and I'm sure the number is probably higher than that, but let's just give you an indication of where I've gone. Now, here's my biggest number of shame. Can anyone guess what 300 is?
Good batting average.
Oh, that would be a great batting average. Yeah, I wouldn't be up here, okay? It's actually a really low number, believe it or not. How's that? I'll frame that. Anyone else? It's the lowest number you can get. Yeah, and here's the thing. I got it twice, not once, okay? So if you want to come out after break and say, man, I'm a bigger failure than you, then let's have a conversation. I'd love to meet you. Okay, I'd love to meet you anyway, but we can talk about that. All right, so I can speak to this idea of having a lot of failures, because in the process of having a lot of failures, I've been very curious as to why I've failed so much and what could I do differently to actually learn from it. So I want to share a story about failure, and it's this. There was one company in the 1970s that actually brought all these big ideas, these multi-billion-dollar ideas into sort of, they catalyzed them, the internet, the graphic user interface that became the operating system, the mouse and the personal computer. Does anybody know what that one company was? Whoever said that, you're right. Yes, sir. You win the prize. I have nothing, but you win it. It is Xerox. The Xerox Research Park. It was the Palo Alto Research Center Park. Came up with all 4 of these ideas back in the 70s. But here's the crazy thing. Why didn't they commercialize them? What were the reasons they couldn't commercialize them? Well, was it the technology? You know, it's early stages, 1970s, right? Actually, every time they shared the technology, even in its most rudimentary form, consumers got excited. They saw the promise of these new technologies. They were one of those, perceivably different than what was out there today. So it wasn't the technology. And then when we took the technologies and they wrote, sort of concepts based on that, based on a leverageable insight, like, hey, instead of having to use 4 fingers to move the cursor around, you can just use your wrist and hand. Oh, that seems like a nice benefit, right? Scored off the charts. All of them scored off the charts in terms of concepts. So the desirability was definitely validated. So it wasn't the concepts. Budgets? No. Park was one of the best funded research institutions out there, outside of maybe AT&T Labs. So no, it wasn't the budgets. At the end of the day, if you read the book, it's called The Peddlers of Lightning or something like that, it basically is people. You see the innovators, the insight champions, the people that had the great ideas, that had vetted the desirability, that had worked on the feasibility, and then actually contemplating a business model for the viability. They put all that together. They still couldn't get it through. And here's why. They ran into 3 walls. So the first wall is this. They ran into a wall where some of the business leaders, they presented these great insights, this great vetting, basis scores that showed $1 billion potential. And here's the reaction. Well, this could cannibalize my existing business. What do I do then? So they ran into a wall of fear. That happens a lot of times when you feel displacement. It happens for jobs. So that was one wall. The next wall was this. They ran into business leaders, and business said, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm going to take a lot of meetings on this. This is really great. But when push comes to shove, they're general managers. And they look at their portfolio of growth initiatives, and they have to hit the quarter. Guess what? They never say no to it, but they never give it the full budgeting and resources and priority it's required to really take it to the end zone. So they run into a wall of apathy just because there's so many other things that are competing for people's interest, and a lot of other things that are a lot risky, a lot easier to do, and a lot more immediate payback. And I think you've probably experienced that too. And the last one, this is the one that's most frustrating. I'm sure you've heard this too. Prove it. It's a new concept. It's a new idea. Prove it. Ow. I mean, that's hard. So people run into a wall of disbelief. So those are the 3 walls that folks run into, that we all run into. So what do we do about that? Well, it is our job not just to come up with a great leverageable consumer insight. The day of a good idea that sells itself, I don't know if there ever really was that day. It requires much more than having the right content. It requires us becoming champions for the idea, having the leadership and influencing skills to get it beyond those walls of fear, those walls of apathy, those walls of disbelief, because those are human dynamics. You could have all the best content in the world, but those walls still exist even with the best content. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And by the way, you are needed in the boardroom. That means you. So how do we get there? Let's talk about a simple framework that I want you guys to be thinking about as we have all these great speakers come up who are very skilled at influencing and at persuasion and at leadership. And I want you to use this framework to think about your job and what they're teaching you. So I call it a T leadership model. So let me explain the 2 parts of the T. The vertical is what you guys are awesome at. It's the subject matter expertise. It's the ability to go and do an ethnography and figure out what's the compensatory behavior that's happening there that you need to be picking up. It's the ability to sit in those focus groups or those one-on-ones and say, there's a deeper insight. That's the leverageable insight. It isn't this. It's the ability to do the statistics and the conjoints and the factor cluster and all that to get the right segmentation, right? All that is going to be required because if you don't have a strong vertical, you're going to have a very floppy horizontal, okay? But let's talk more importantly, not the subject matter expertise, but what we're going to focus more on this week is on the horizontal, the influencing skills to be able to take what you have as great content and convince people who disbelieve, who are afraid, or who are apathetic, okay? Because those are emotional things that you're going to have to deal with, not whether you're right or you're wrong. That's what we're going to talk about in terms of the horizontal, giving you the breadth. And at the end of the day, you're going to have to be as comfortable in the field as you are in the boardroom. And I say boardroom, and yes, not all of you are going to be in the boardroom per se, but let's use it as a symbol for the idea of where decisions are being made, where the decision makers are. You need to be in there, being the eyes, the ears, and the hearts of the consumers so that they're making better more informed, and more emotionally stable, honestly, decisions that are best for the consumers, not just for what's right in front of them. All right, so when I think about leadership and influence, I like to go to this model. It's the 5 E's of leadership. I've taken this off the web. I don't even know who the author is, so I'm just stealing this. But what I'd like to share with you is the idea that when it comes to the horizontal part, the first 3 are the most important, all right? So it's the idea of envisioning, enrolling, and energizing, all right? So what does envision mean? Okay? True leaders have a vision. And it is described as a bold and unpredictable vision for the future. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, well, I'm not the CEO. I'm not in charge of our corporate vision. Granted, I get it. But one of my favorite Insight partners was Nicole Clark at VF. She came in, and she had a vision of, we need to create an Insights toolbox that we can share with all our businesses that sort of contemplates an innovation Insights toolbox. When they have a certain type of question, what are the menu of options available for them to try to answer different types of questions? That was her vision when she came in, and she made that happen. And it was an incredible vision that the company had nothing ever seen anything like that. And that allowed her to have greater influence, and eventually she's currently now part of the senior leadership team in Asia. Yeah, she represents Insights, but she's also in the senior leadership team. So when they have senior leadership team meetings, she's called in for that because she had a vision about something that was in her domain, but that was bold and unpredictable and had never been done before. So what are the qualities of a great vision? Let's look into that. So powerful vision, first and foremost, paints a story of the future. And this will be something that I think you are extremely skilled to do because you've had to have a sort of, I would say, front row view of the past. Like what's happening today and what's happened in the past. You have it better than anybody else. But you need to use those insights, those learnings, those observations to then translate to something in the future. Now, the problem with the future is this, especially if you want something that is visionary. It's got to be bold. It's got to be unpredictable. And I know a lot of you, and I was managing a group, so I totally understand this, you're valued on your ability to predict, to make good decisions, right? Well, this is a new skill. This is taking, yes, your ability to predict, but also go beyond that and say, this isn't fully predictable. But based on what we're seeing from consumers, we believe that without taking this next step and taking a risk, we're not going to get to this great vision of the future. Like when Nicole came in, she didn't have any resources for her idea. There had been no precedence done on anything like a toolbox before, especially around innovation, and it didn't matter to her because she knew it was the right thing to do. And so what you're going to have to pull in is, yes, take all the data that you have that have allowed us to make better decisions and predict things, but take the bold leap of faith and say, what do you think needs to be done? If you could do one thing that's not being done today, what is that one thing? Again, if it's bold and unpredictable, there's a higher likelihood that it's going to ignite people's passions and imaginations. So, yes, literally step outside of that comfort zone you have and do something and make a pronouncement about something you believe needs to happen for the organization that's not there today. And the great thing about a powerful vision is this. It's a story of the future that's bold and unpredictable, because if it's predictable, then guess what? People aren't going to be as ignited, their imagination and their passion is not going to be, and they're not going to be compelled to join. And at the end of the day, what you want in a vision is as many people on board of that vision as possible. Your jobs, in order to have a voice in the leadership team meetings, is to make sure that you're not just sort of making better decision support or providing information. You need to provide your point of view. You have more information and better information than anybody in that room, trust me, because they don't see the consumers. They're not the closest ones to our users. You are, and you need to have the imagination and the courage to say, this is what I believe. I don't have full proof. I have some leading indicators, some trailing indicators, but I believe this is the right thing that we need to try. And we may fail. That's okay. So I've had the pleasure in the last few years to work with the BMW team and their DesignWorks team, and I think they're masters at painting vision. So I'm going to share one with you that they did about the future vision of cars. So I'm going to go back to Nicole. What she did when she was selling the vision of this toolbox is she basically drew out a scenario and had us imagine, we had a question, we didn't know what to do, and then, waha, here's this toolbox, and you opened it up, and it actually gave you 2 or 3 things that you could be doing for any question. She helped us imagine what that could be. And so I think the same thing applies. I mean, that's obviously about a car, but when you think about painting your vision, you want people to imagine what it could be and how it might impact their lives, okay? So going back to the leadership model, the next one is about enrolling. And so once you have a vision, you need to get as many people aboard as possible. Now, when I saw this originally, I said, enroll. Okay, that means I'm going to be a great salesperson. I'm going to go out there, I'm going to pitch my idea, I'm going to get everybody on board, and guess what? I did it with pure brute force. And one of the things I noticed is that when I or my team was not part of the project team anymore, things didn't go as well. The energy wasn't quite there. And it wasn't until my second year when I got my 360 feedback that I started understanding why being a hard salesperson wasn't the route. And in fact, I'll share with you the verbatim that stands out for me in my 360. Lesson I've learned, I'm still learning, and I might be doing too hard of a sell here too, I don't know, but it literally is passion and technique and intent led to this. So I had to learn something new. I learned a new skill, how to enroll people differently. So instead of selling your idea, which was what I was doing, so let's look at the dynamics of selling an idea. So what are you trying to do? You're trying to convince and persuade. You have a bill of goods or a value proposition that you want people to basically buy. Okay, you want to sell, they want to buy. And your end result is kind of like when you sell your house. You get a sold sign, right? That's what selling is about. And I think this visually gives you a connotation of this guy. Now look, I have a little bit more hair than him, but our 360s probably weren't that much different. So what's the difference when it comes to influencing? It's a nuance. It's a big nuance. So influencing, instead, is this. Instead of convincing and persuading, your job is to go there and listen and have empathy. And guess what? There's the implication, especially if you've always been on the side of content and the side of data, on the side of being right. It means that you're there to listen and be persuaded and potentially modify and change the information you have to fit the context. It's not always about being right. It's about being able to relate. It's not going in there for a vision, for values or a bill of goods. It's about going in there with a shared vision and a shared purpose, and going in it with that frame, and be willing to have your vision and your purpose be co-created. Okay? So it's less about ownership, it's about getting input, and it's about actually bringing them aboard. A lot less about results and much more about relationships. You know, I tell my team, when you go into a meeting, especially the more senior you get, half of it's content and half of it's relation. And as you go even more senior, I would say it's 20% content, 80% relation. All right? Now, what you're going to struggle with is that your content is probably the best in the organization. It's probably the most vetted. It's probably the most, I think, solid. But you can't use that as a crutch to really be listening empathetically to what their fears are and what their concerns are, what their needs are, and what their aspirations. You need to be speaking to them at that level. Because at the end of the day, you want a shared vision. Don't care about if it's perfect. Don't care about if it's off a percentage here or if they're not using the exact words the right way. What you really want is more and more people, when you're not in the room, to be promoting the vision that you jointly share. And in fact, the best thing, and the best trick I always know, is make it their idea. Get your name off the idea and make it their idea so that they're promoting it. That's enrolling. Luckily, this week we have some great influencers that are going to teach us actually how to enroll, and I'm pretty excited about that. I am running out of time. I've got another 4 minutes, so I'm going to jump quickly to the next section. This section is about energizing, and let me just paint it really simply. Part of energizing is capturing the hearts and the minds, and to do that, we've all heard this, and I think last year was spoken a lot about storytelling. This isn't storytelling. I don't need to say anything more about this. This is information. It's important. I'm not going to discount it, but it's not storytelling. We had a challenge. We had a new consumer that we're going after in China for the North Face, but we didn't know how to bring that to life. And so this is how we did it. "
何处是我的终点？我的极限在哪里？
如何得到真正的友谊？
大家都说我是强驴，但我不是这么看自己。
他们让我一起去，但我心存犹豫。我有力量，够敏捷，我很聪明，但自然对我来说，依旧是个谜。
隔些日子不去户外，我的心就蠢蠢欲动。
然后我赶紧把这个放进去。
我走遍天南海北，饱览无限风光。人才是最美的风景。
我永远不会忘记那些我到过的地方，更不会忘记那些陪伴过我的人。
这个好。
你感觉到这个背包的力量，蛮好的，可以吧？好，这边。好，
我想挑战自己。
大自然任我嬉戏，任我欢笑。
我看，我感受，故我在。在大自然中分享我的已知，填补他们的未知。
从内心到身体，从身体到精神。
我要结识新朋友。
投身自然，让我生机无限。
走进自然，开辟我的新疆界。
拥抱自然，你我共同书写回忆。
当时你跳得好高呀！
这就是我们的圈子。
So the ideal situation would have obviously been to take the entire North Face team in California and then bring them to China and have that experience with the consumers. But we couldn't do that, so we had to bring the consumers to them. And that was the CI's team ability to really capture important insights about the Chinese consumer to share. You see, in the North Face in the US and in Europe, there's two main segments. There's the hardcore and then there's the trendsetter. And you can think of the hardcore as the person that likes to go to the next peak and sort of outdoes themselves in terms of, climbing higher or setting a better time. Well, the hardcore in China is very different. The whole category is fairly nascent, and the hardcore there is really about bringing people into the actual activity and teaching them. And it fits very well with Chinese culture because the two most respected professions in Chinese cultures are healers and educators. And so the hardcore really view themselves in the context of the Chinese culture. And the trendsetter in the US is somebody who likes to be seen with the North Face on and being seen doing the activity with the emblem. Whereas in China, it was slightly different. For them, it was about social connection. And you saw it actually at the end of the climbs, a week later, they'd get together and view the photos. So there's much more of a social aspect to that segment. And there was an identified of a third that never showed up, and that was this. The people that had never been out in the outdoors. They'd grown up in the urban sprawl all their life. So that's why great storytelling is important to have people enroll in your vision and get energized about it. So I'm going to leave you with this one last thought. What we're asking for is a lot of courage to go in there and command the boardroom. It's not only to just, raise your hand up and say, I belong there, but you have to command it, and that takes a lot of courage. And you guys in the organization are the truth seekers. You see more truths than anybody else. But here's generally the three stages that truths go through. The first is this. It's ridiculed, okay? Then it's violently opposed. And eventually it gets to the part of being self-evident. So what we want to get to is using the influencing skills to help you get to the place where it's self-evident. Now I want to introduce our first speaker. She is an amazing woman who I got to meet on a telephone conversation. I met her this morning, and I would say very much connected, sort of a kindred soul. And here's why. She's actually the most popular teacher at the Yale School of Management. She teaches a course on influence and persuasion, among other things, and on addiction and a whole bunch of other stuff. But it's not her coursework, I believe, that makes her really popular. It's because somebody who's actually really popular with students generally teaches from the heart. And so part of it, and I was asking her about her motivations, she really believes in empowering people, good people, that want to do good. And it's sort of this idea of cascading what your beliefs are to others so that they can give back. And so I think we're going to be really lucky today to have Zoe Chance come and share with us some of the insights she shared with her students about persuasion and influence. Zoe?